Here, this is a veteran sergeant, first class in the Army Reserves, who had survived out in Bosnia and other locations that were outside of his country, now lay dead of a gunshot wound at the hands of a countryman, all for no more than $2,000 cash, because the checks that were in the bag were of no use to anybody. They were made out specifically to, the company. So all this for $2,000.
Wow.
That's heartbreaking.
People say, they want to move to the suburbs, find themselves a place with nice, quiet, tree-lined streets where no crime happens the way it does in the big, bad city. But crime will find you many of the places you go. And on this episode of Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective, Jessie, Harry, and I are going to talk about one that is a very sad story. It happened in a very prosperous suburb in central Ohio, but it was indeed a very violent crime. We appreciate you tuning in again to our podcast. And Harry, the murder of Renold Williams is just a heartbreaking story, isn't it?
Oh, it is, Clark. It's there's in so many ways. This is heartbreaking. This is an individual who, hardworking man. He was a veteran, had just returned from Bosnia not too long before, where he served his country with distinction, had a wife and kids, had a good job at the Metropolitan Armored Car Company, where he was a 19-year employee and had risen through the ranks of the company and became a trusted supervisor. And it's tragedy doesn't seem to care who it hits. And I know that some of our listeners out there have firsthand experience of what we're talking about. But in this particular case, it was the day before Thanksgiving, Wednesday, November 26th of 1997. Individual by the name of Renold Williams got up in the morning, did his regular routine in the morning, kissed his wife and kids goodbye, and went to head off to work at the Metropolitan Armored Car Company. When he arrived there, he found out that another employee had called off sick, and so they needed somebody to fill in his role, the individual's role, who happened to be a messenger. And in the armored car business, that often means that they're the person that actually delivers the money from the armored car to the bank or credit union. So they're messenger, delivery person, whatever you want to call it. And on this particular morning, he filled in and was the messenger, and the armored truck left its location at headquarters and started its route. And about 11:30 in the morning, the armored vehicle approached National City Bank in Bexley, Ohio. And normally the armored car driver is able to park in such a way in the parking lot that he can keep an eye on the messenger or the delivery person walking to the bank and help provide some security in that. In this particular case, the bank's parking lot was so full that there was no room for the armored car to pull up and get in that position where it could observe the messenger as he got out and went into the bank. So they had to park a little ways back, and that made the messenger a little bit more vulnerable. But Mr. Williams exited the back of the armored vehicle carrying a bag. It was specifically for National City Bank. It had about $10,000 worth of personal checks and business checks that were going to be deposited into the bank, and no more than $2,000 in cash in it. And so Mr. Williams is walking towards the front of the bank, and just as he gets to the front door, witnesses see a black man wearing dark clothing approach Williams, and without warning, the individual raised a dark-colored semi-automatic pistol and fired one shot into Mr. Williams' chest. Mr. Williams goes down. The individual that shot him is observed reaching over Mr. Williams's body, picks up the bag, and then is observed running to a blue Ford Escort that was driven by a larger male. The shooter jumped in the passenger seat. Vehicle takes off at a high rate of speed, and witnesses in the area come running to the aid of Mr. Williams to try to comfort him and provide whatever medical assistance that they could. The police were called, and while all that was going on, a short distance from the bank, there was a motorist that was sitting in his vehicle, and he was at a stop sign, and he looked in his rearview mirror, and he saw this blue Ford Escort coming at him with two men inside at a very high rate of speed. They tried to go around him on the right-hand side, and when they came back, they hit the motorist's vehicle, and so it's kind of a hit and run. The motorist tried to follow the vehicle, but it was going too fast and it was too dangerous to try to follow him. So the motorist drove to the Bexley Police Department to report the hit and run without knowing anything about the details of what happened at the bank. And meanwhile, back at the bank, at about 11:44 a.m., medical personnel were there. They could not revive Mr. Williams. So here this is a veteran sergeant, first class in the Army Reserves, who had survived out in Bosnia and other locations that were outside of his country, now lay dead of a gunshot wound at the hands of a countryman, all for no more than $2,000 cash, because the checks that were in the bag were of no use to anybody. They were made out specifically to, the company. So all this for $2,000.
Wow.
That's heartbreaking. That's absolutely heartbreaking.
Was it not typical at that time, Harry, for a person in Renold Williams' role as a messenger on an armored car company to wear a bulletproof vest or some kind of protection?
Sometimes they did, but in this case, that was not Mr. Williams's, job. He filled in. I don't recall that he had a bulletproof vest on. I don't think that he did. We've had individuals that have been shot either below the vest or above the vest before and get killed, even though they're wearing a bulletproof vest. But in this case, I don't recall him having one on. And again, if it would have been his normal position, he might have had one on. But in this case, he was just filling in. So I don't think
they keep going back to that. He was just filling in. He wasn't supposed to be there. That's haunting.
Yeah, he didn't have to do it either. He just volunteered to do it. That's the kind of individual Mr. Williams was. From when we interviewed his coworkers, that is, he'd do anything to help anybody. And he'd been with the company for 19 years. He was a trusted employee, and had worked his way up to a supervisory role. And here he is volunteering to take, someone's spot. And because he's that kind of person, basically, and it cost him his life. And so it is, wife and kids and, everything. Day before Thanksgiving, what a very sad situation that was. And so anyway.
So you hear the call over, like you said, the PA system there at the FBI office in Columbus in the morning, right?
Yeah, I was in the office at the time, and I remember um, hearing over the FBI intercom in the office that there was a 91, which is nomenclature for a bank robbery. That's what the 91 is. The 91, that's the way we list our crimes, is by number. And 91 happens to be bank robbery. And the location, the dispatcher said the location. And I remember what made this unusual is that he said at least one person has been shot, and a suspect fled in a blue Ford Escort northbound from the bank. So hearing that a person had been shot is very unusual in a bank robbery. And so right away I knew, this was very, very serious, and it was going to be a little bit different than most of the other bank robberies that I had worked. So I responded to the scene in Bexley at the National City Bank. And of course, as you can imagine, there were police officers and people everywhere. By the time I got there, I could see Mr. Williams' body underneath a white sheet. They had used a white sheet to cover him. And so clearly he was deceased. And so I asked an officer, I said, hey, who's in charge of the scene here? I'm with the FBI. The officer pointed over to a gentleman, one of the detectives by the name of Brian Holbrook, and said, Brian's in charge here. So I went up to Brian, and he was interviewing some witnesses. And when he took a breath, I approached him. I said, Detective Holbrook, I'm Harry Trombitas with the FBI. And he kind of smiled at me and rolled his eyes.
The feds have come. Dun, dun, dun.
And I'm thinking, well, fuck you too. I mean, just the way he reacted, kind of made me appreciate him. And I knew right away that Brian and I would get along fabulous that day, because he would not hesitate to give me any grief as we worked together. So, all kidding aside, he and I continued to interview witnesses and confirm information that we thought. And we also had a number of FBI agents and Bexley detectives and police officers responded to the scene and assist in interviews and following any tips and that we might have had at the scene. But we were unable to come up with anything that identified who the subject was and who the driver of the getaway vehicle was. So we knew that we were in this for probably the long haul. And Mr. Williams' autopsy took place the next day at the Franklin County Coroner's Office. And Dr. Keith Norton was the coroner who conducted the autopsy. And he indicated to us that Mr. Williams died from a single gunshot wound to the lower chest. He said that once the bullet entered Mr. Williams, it traveled through his body and it struck several vital organs in his body, resulting in his death. So, when someone gets shot, especially at close range like that, that bullet can, create all kinds of havoc in a human body. And unfortunately, it was bad enough that it struck numerous organs, and Mr. Williams died pretty much right away. So, again, very sad. We continued to work together through Thanksgiving and through the weekend, trying to find out who was responsible. Again, we were following up tips that were called into both Bexley Police Department and the FBI. We were all working, diligently on those tips, but we weren't able to really get one that we thought was, the significant one that would lead to the identification and arrest of the subject. And then on December 3rd, it was Mr. Williams's funeral. And at that funeral, I met Mr. Williams' wife, Julie. And I remember Brian and I, talking to her and giving her a hug and letting her know that we were going to do everything we could to, catch the man that did this to her husband. And she was so nice. I mean, just heartbroken, obviously, because she and Mr. Williams had a great marriage. And like I said, they had kids, and she hugged us and she said that she had her faith in us, that we would be able to catch the person. And she wanted to let us know that she really appreciated everybody's effort, not only ours, but the other officers and agents that were working hard on the case. So she was just a very nice, respectful person. And we sat next to her, and, during the funeral and that, just to try to bring her some peace and comfort. And I think she really appreciated that. After the funeral, we're still following leads, but as I mentioned, there doesn't seem to be any of the leads that jump out at us identifying who the individual, was. And so we decided that we had some good witnesses, and that we would go ahead and have a sketch artist draw a composite drawing of what the individual looked like based on the witness testimony. And so we had a local police sketch artist, come in and sit down with one of the witnesses that we thought had the best look at the subject that shot Mr. Williams. And of course, it's always a two-edged sword when you have a police artist. Number one, some of the artist drawings are so poorly done that it looks almost cartoonish. It doesn't look like a real person. And you don't want your composite drawing to be, cartoonish. You want it to look like a real person. So on the one hand, you don't want it to look that way, but on the second hand, there are some artists that were so good. And keep in mind, we didn't have the technology to put together drawings now that we do today.
It's evolved a lot.
Yes, exactly. And so, this is literally somebody sketching a person, like you would have a courtroom artist, I guess, if you will. Only they can't look at the person. They're getting their description from the witness. So that makes
and sometimes go ahead, Clark. You and I were going to say this or same thing. Great mind.
Yeah.
Witness descriptions, Harry, you've mentioned on other episodes, you'll hear throughout the case, is sometimes people are so traumatized that they cannot remember specific details exactly.
Yeah, they oftentimes, they get so focused on one thing, maybe like the person's nose or the person's ball cap, that they don't really get a good look at the rest of the the facial features, for example, or the build of the individual. So it's really a crapshoot sometimes. And fortunately for us, the artist had a lot of skill and made a pretty decent composite drawing of the subject based on what witness description and that. And that composite or that drawing was shown to some of the other witnesses, and they all went, "Boy, that's pretty good." I mean, that really kind of resembles what I recall. So, but one of the other downfalls could be, as I started to say earlier, you could have one that looks so cartoonish, it's laughable. But the other kind of bad thing is that it could be so lifelike that people kind of think it's a picture, and that's what the subject looks like. And so if they have some information that they're thinking about, but it doesn't look exactly like the person that they're thinking about doesn't look exactly like the drawing, they may not call it in. So it was very, like I said, it's always a tough thing to decide whether you want to release it or not, or not. But we didn't have anything else really, good. I mean, we had 328 or 48 tips, 348, I think, but none of them were the ones that were going to lead us in the right direction. And so we went ahead and put it out there, and hoping that somebody would call in. I know Metropolitan Armored Car Company put up $11,000. I know Crime Stoppers had some money up. Again, trying to get people who might have some information over that hump of, do I want to call and let them know what I think or what I've heard. This is sometimes money will loosen that and make people feel a little bit more comfortable. But up until that time, go ahead.
I was going to say, for those in the area or not in the Columbus area, what exactly is Crime Stoppers?
And I think Crime Stoppers is nationwide. Just so
Okay.
you know. So most people are probably familiar with it. But Crime Stoppers is an organization usually made up of businesses who donate money to help solve crimes in their particular area. So if a crime occurs, Crime Stoppers may put up some reward money that hopefully, again, causes people to want to call in to collect the reward money, obviously, but give investigators the leads that they need to solve a case. I mean, Crime Stoppers is a great organization. I've used them so many times over the years, and they help me and others on some of our more difficult cases. And what's nice about it is they offer the reward, and so somebody that calls in can remain anonymous, and so they don't have to even give their name. They're basically given a number, and Crime Stoppers doesn't trace their phones, do anything. They just collect the information and they pass it on to detectives. And when we get the tip, all we do is all we get is, we don't get a name of the caller at all. They don't have to give their names. If we just get tip number 75, tipster number 75 says, it's Renold Williams, is the individual that we're looking for example. And so it's really a great organization. And like I said, they've helped me out tremendously over the years. And so we were hoping to get, people to provide the information that we needed, but we just weren't getting anywhere. And then we were doing everything we could, but the bottom line, the information wasn't coming until we got a break, and that was on December 18th of 97 at about 9:12 p.m. in the evening. There was a girl that was in a fight with her boyfriend. The boyfriend hit her a couple of times, threatened to kill her children. She was able to escape, went to a friend's house. They called the police. Police came to take the report. She was sitting out in the cruiser, the police cruiser, telling the officers what had, transpired and that. And they were kind of finishing up with what had happened and getting, the information. And she said that it was her boyfriend was Tanachi Ward, and that he was the one that beat her and then also threatened to kill her children. And they were kind of finishing up, and she said, "Oh, and I want you to know that he even bragged to me about he was the one responsible for killing the armored car guard in Bexley."
The
And
break has come.
Yeah.
that was a huge break. And I always thought hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I mean, we've all heard that saying before, and here, you screw up and you hurt your girlfriend and that, they're going to do stuff to get back at you. And fortunately, she did the right thing by coming forward and identifying her boyfriend as the one that had bragged about killing Mr. Williams. So,
Harry, I'm sorry, but at this point, it's almost a month since the crime. In a situation like this, do you, as an investigator, worry that the longer you go without a suspect or an arrest, the less likely you are to find one, unless they commit another crime or are turned in by somebody, an acquaintance like Tamachi Ward was?
yeah, sometimes we feel that way. Like the longer that it goes, it's like a missing kid, missing child. When the longer we go without any information at all, it makes it less likely that we're going to identify the individual responsible. Uh, so it does strike you as an investigator that we'd like to get things wrapped up quickly. And back on the 26th of November when this crime occurred, it would have been fantastic to have the name of of our subject that night, so we could go out and make the arrest. But some cases, just take a long time, and then something like this happened where the boyfriend beats his girlfriend. She gets mad at him. She calls the police, tells the police, that he bragged about killing the armored car guard. And that's how these things happen. Relationships change sometimes. That's why investigators, even years later, will continue to go back and talk to people that might have information because those relationships can change. Whereas maybe my girlfriend at one point would do everything she could to not tell on me, give me up. Well, maybe 2 years later, now she's mad at me. I haven't been making, child support payments, or I haven't been doing this or that, or I'm beating her now. And, so relationships change. And that's why investigators have to continue to go back and re-interview people because, we all hear about the cold cases. Well, that's why we have cold case squads. They go back and they relook at all of these, any evidence. We resubmit things to, DNA advances are occurring all the time. So we continue to try to, submit evidence that can be re-examined. We go back and we re-interview witnesses. Sometimes we find new witnesses and, to talk to. So it can take, some of these cases can take a long time, but you really never give up. And sometimes it's just an incident like beating your girlfriend that she decides to call the police on him and then, drop the bomb that he's been bragging about, killing the armored car guard. That solves the case for you.
Yeah.
Good
So now
for
you got a
her.
name. Yeah, now you got a name to work with.
Now we have a name to work with. Um, she also indicated, she told us during, she's talking to the police. I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over that. Uh, so the police officers knew that this is a big deal, what she just told them about her boyfriend. So they contacted Brian and I and let us know that we have this woman who's was in a domestic situation with her boyfriend. She's saying that her boyfriend is the one that killed the armored car guard. Do you want to come and interview her? And so they transported this girlfriend to the police precinct. So Brian and I went to the police precinct to interview her, and obviously she was extremely nervous, you know, but she did the best she could to relate to us what information she had, and one of the things said that she was living with her boyfriend on Seymour Avenue, and the same location where he had just beat her, and she had called the police from, but she was living with him with her children, and they got into an argument, and he hit her a couple of times, threatened to kill her and her children. Actually wanted to put one of their children in the same dog cage as the dog. It's just
Oh, how awful.
no kidding. So anyway, she was able to flee the house. She told us that that morning, when around 6 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, November 26th, the date of the homicide, Mr. Williams' homicide, that Tanachi Ward had gotten up around 6 a.m., got dressed to leave, had on a light blue sweatshirt, blue jeans, dark toboggan, and he entered his light blue Ford Escort and took off out of the house. She stayed in bed for a while and got up and cleaned the house. At about 12 o'clock noon, she received a call from Tanachi indicating that he was out filling out a application at a local business and that he would be home around 1 o'clock or so. Around 1 o'clock, he shows back up at home, and she comes downstairs, and he's got the TV on, and of course the media is covering the shooting at the bank, and you could see the body of Mr. Williams laying in front of the bank with the sheet over him, and they're watching this, and Tanachi said, "I did that," and
Wow.
indicated to her that he is the one that shot and killed the guard. And she asked why he did it, and he indicated to her that the man pulled a gun on him first, and we know that's not true. Mr. Williams did not have his gun out, as far as I can recall. So we know that he didn't pull the gun first. It was Tanachi that had walked up and just shot the guy, shot the guard. So anyway, he went on and he told about how he had grabbed the money bag, ran to the getaway car, which was the Escort. While they were, he wouldn't indicate who the driver was. He just said that there was somebody else driving the car, that while they were fleeing the bank, they had a small accident, and which we know is true, had run into the other vehicle at the stop sign not too far from the bank. And he indicated to the girlfriend that he only got about $2,000, and he had to split that with the getaway driver. So not long after that, Tanachi Ward made a call to his brother, and his brother came to the house. They went into the kitchen to talk, and pretty soon they went outside, and according to the girlfriend, messed up the forward escort to make it look like it was sitting in the yard for a long time. I think they broke the window on the mirror, broke the mirror, I should say. They flattened a tire, broke off a gas cap or something. And again, and just in case investigators came to check on the vehicle, it would look like it'd been sitting there for a while. So anyway, once we were done talking to the girlfriend, the Columbus police went ahead and arrested. They found they were looking for Tanachi Ward. He was driving another vehicle at the time, a black Ford Bronco, and he was found at a relative's house. And they arrested him on the domestic violence and assault charge, and took him down to police headquarters. And Brian and I were told that he was down there. And if we wanted to interview him, we could. So around 2:00 in the morning, Brian and I finished up with our interview with the girlfriend, and we went down to police headquarters and went into the interview room. And it was kind of funny to see Tanachi was kind of like leaned over, like, hey, it's only a domestic violence, charge. No big deal. Brian,
no big deal. That tells you a lot about his character right there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it happens every day. I'm sure it does, unfortunately, but most people hopefully don't end up beating their loved ones. But anyway, when we introduced ourselves to him, Brian said Bexley Police, and I said FBI. He knew right away that it was a little more serious than a domestic violence charge. So he kind of sat back up in his chair, and I think his jaw about hit the table because he knew, what we were going to ask him about. And of course, he denied having any responsibility in Mr. Williams' homicide. We let him know that we were going to continue to work the case, and that, if he wanted to put something on his side of the ledger, he better think about cooperating in that. And we also wanted to know the identity of the getaway driver. And we planted the seed that if, we were there, if he wanted to talk and help himself out. He didn't want to, so he was taken down to the Franklin County Jail and booked on the domestic violence charges. Brian and I went back. I think at that point we probably went home and got some sleep, but we were back at it the next morning, coming up with a game plan on what we were going to do. With the help of some other agents and officers, we went ahead and executed a search warrant at Tanachi Ward's house on Seymour Avenue. And while we were in there searching around, we found numerous things that we took as evidence. One was there was just a spent shell casing, 9mm shell casing, and we knew that a 9mm round was the round that killed Mr. Williams. So we found this, empty shell casing, and we took that as a piece of evidence. There was an SKS semi-automatic rifle that we took, the ammunition to it. He also had 2 bulletproof vests, typical things that I'm sure, Jessica, you have a couple bulletproof vests.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
When you're out.
Different colors to match different outfits. Yeah.
You always need a spare.
Absolutely. And we also went ahead and executed a search warrant on the blue Ford Escort and processed that. And so we were in the, pretty busy that particular day. We also found his Tanachi's cell phone in the car. and that was seized. And we went through that. We have cell phone investigators that are able to go through the phone and identify, who was called, what times, that kind of information. I can't remember if we had cell phone tower capabilities at that time, but the ability to tell where the call was made from, I'm not sure if that was available in 1997, but it may have been. I'm just not aware of it. And so we took the evidence down to the Columbus Police Lab, especially the 9mm shell casing was significant. And the firearms examiner, Mark Hardy, with the Columbus Police Department, was able to identify that shell casing as having been fired by the same gun that was used to kill Mr. Williams. So that was a good piece of evidence that we had. We had the girlfriend's story. We had the blue Ford Escort had struck that one motorist's vehicle. We had taken paint scrapings off the civilian or the motorist vehicle. They were blue paint scrapings, and we collected that and we sent it to the FBI lab just to see if they could say that it came from Tanachi Ward's blue Ford Escort. And so we kind of in a state of flux here, trying to get some of our evidence examined and information back. And we got a tip that the getaway driver might be a particular individual that they were seen hanging out together that morning. And so on the day before Christmas, December 24th, Brian and I called in an individual that we had received tip information that might be the getaway driver. So he came in to the FBI office with his attorney, and he admitted that he does hang around with Tanachi Ward quite a bit, but wasn't with him that day. He claimed that he went to a company called Plasco Light to fill out a job description or a job application, sorry. And he was there probably around 12:30 that afternoon, filling out the application. He claimed that he was working on his car from 7 a.m. till he went to fill out the job application. So he indicated that he wasn't with Ward at all that particular day. And then once he was done at Plasco Light, he went home and spent the rest of the day at home. So he kind of indicated to us that he was not available to be involved in the shooting of Mr. Williams and act as the driver of the getaway vehicle. But in reality, Mr. Williams was shot, 11:15, 11:30 time frame, and that was plenty of time for the getaway driver and Tanachi Ward to get out to this Plasco Light business to fill out a job application. It was like they were trying to create an alibi. So after the shooting, they went to the business to fill out applications to show that they couldn't be involved with the killing because they were job hunting at the time. So,
but they forget that you guys take into account travel time and where to go, and
exactly. And
alibis are not so plain. Hey, I was doing this on this day. You look at clear windows.
Yeah, in fact, when you look at the timeline when Mr. Williams was shot, and when they arrived out at Plasco Light to fill out the applications, there was plenty of time for them to be able to get there and do that. And on December 29th, I went out to Plasco Light and met with, just walked in and trying to confirm information from what the getaway driver had told us, and identified the company called Plasco Light as the place they went out and filled out the application, or that he went out and filled out the application. And um, I happened to speak with the woman that actually was there that morning when they came in, and she said, "Yeah, the one guy filled out the application. Um, I have his name here. I have the application," and gave us the name of the guy that we had called into the office. The one that we had heard was the getaway driver. And she said there was a second guy here with him. And I remember him because he was very argumentative with me. And I thought, wow, that's unusual. And I took a chance, and I had a photo array, 6 different pictures of 6 different individuals. And Tanachi Ward's picture was in the photo array. And I said, can you see if the person that was argumentative with you that one particular morning is in this photo array? And she looked at it, and she went right to Tanachi's picture, and she said, "That's him. That's the guy that came in with the other, our suspected getaway driver, and filled out an application." And
Well, that's a terrible alibi. Make sure that they remember you. Like,
yeah,
Oh,
I-
yeah.
I mean, I guess I get the point. You're trying to be remembered, but maybe not for aggression. That would,
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it was fortuitous for us that the guy that we brought into the office dropped the name of the business that he was at. He could have just said, "I was out filling out applications, that morning," and not given us the name. But because he told us it was Plasco Light, we now had a location to go and verify that he was there, and then also see if Tanachi was there with him. And in fact, he was, and the lady picked him out of the photo array. So it was good information for us. We went to the prosecutor's office. We told him, that we had what we had on the case. We had the girlfriend's testimony. We had the recovered blue paint that from the one vehicle that was hit while the blue Ford Escort was fleeing the area, that we were having analyzed. But it, on the surface, appeared to be identical to the paint on the blue Ford Escort. We had the shell casing that the 9mm shell casing that was positively identified as being from the same gun that was used to kill Mr. Williams. Even though we didn't find the gun at the house, we had a shell casing that was fired by the same gun. So
Ballistics examination looks at the marks that are left on the round that is fired. The shell casing is ejected. Now, what is a physical fingerprint, so to speak, that tells you that it wasn't just the same caliber, it was the same gun?
yeah, it's again, when a weapon is used and a bullet is fired, okay, there's a firing pin on the gun, and that's unique. Every gun has a unique characteristics. For example, the barrel, the bullet it gets hit by the firing pin, leaves a very specific mark to that gun, and it causes the bullet to ignite, and it's fired through the barrel, and they have different striations in that make the bullet spin, so that a spinning bullet is more accurate than one that would go, for example, end over end. So the striations in that, these lands and grooves that are in the barrel, cause it to stay on target, if you will, and travel straight. And those lands and grooves that are are inside the barrel are unique to that particular gun. So when an examiner looks at the firing pin, the markings that come from the firing pin, the location where that firing pin hits the bullet, the marks that travel down, if you did recover the bullet, like in Mr. Williams' bullet was, I believe, recovered, it had unique markings on it. So if you recover the gun, a test bullet can be fired and see if that gun creates the same kind of markings on the test fire as were recovered on the bullet that was found in Mr. Williams. Well, unfortunately for us, we didn't have the gun, but we had the markings from the firing pin. And those markings that were left on the firing pin, the bullet that the shell casing that was recovered from the scene at the National City Bank for when the individual shot and killed Mr. Williams. And that shell casing was compared to the shell casing that was recovered from Tanachi Ward's house during the search. And the firearms examiner was able to compare the two shell casings and noted that the firing pin struck the bullet at exactly the same location and made the same kind of marks on both of the shell casings. So that's unique to that particular gun. And so that was good evidence to indicate that, that the bullet that Tanachi had the same gun that killed Mr. Williams because one of the rounds was recovered in his house. So, or I'm sorry, one of the shell casings was recovered in the house. So, you had again you had the girlfriend's testimony, you had the blue
paint flecks from the car,
the paint from the car. You have the shell casing that was recovered. So we had all this, the evidence that we had collected so far, and we were able to convince the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office that we were reaching the point where we had enough to indict Tanachi Ward for the murder of Renold Williams, and they agreed with us. But the good news was that we weren't as far along as we wanted to be in the investigation. We didn't have all of our ducks in a row. And so fortunately, Tanachi had some drug-related charges against him that were pending. And then because we were able to find a gun, the SKS rifle at Tanachi's house, he was a convicted felon and he wasn't supposed to have any weapons at his residence. So the fact that we found a gun at his residence, and he admitted to Brian and I that the gun was his. So with Tanachi's admission that he had in fact owned the weapon when he was supposed to, and he had been convicted of some drug charges that he had been charged with as well. That combined together, the judge was able to put Tanachi in jail for another year. And we didn't have to try to get him indicted on our charges of killing Mr. Williams at this point. We had some more time to try to gather more evidence, against him. And so that was kind of a blessing for us, was, that Tanachi had these other charges against him that allowed him to spend some more time in jail, and we could keep him off the street while we continued on with our investigation. So that was a great help in our particular situation. We had submitted the paint scraping from the motorist vehicle to the FBI lab, and it came back. The lab report indicated that, in fact, the paint that was recovered from the motorist vehicle that we were able to scrape off his vehicle did match the blue Ford Escort paint. However, it was not exclusive to that blue Ford Escort. So any other blue Ford Escort of that time frame, that was made and was painted at the shop, as it was being built, and that would also have that same kind of paint scraping, that same kind of paint on it. And so even though it was a match to a blue Ford Escort, it was not exclusive to Tanachi Ward's blue Ford Escort. So that was a piece of bad news that we had. So, yeah, as in any investigation, there's going to be some really good stuff that comes up, and then every once in a while you take a hit, a loss, if you will. It doesn't go in your favor. So, we had some things on our side of ledger that were going to be good to hopefully convict him, but we lost one or two things along the way that we were hoping to have, and so we went along, and we finally got to the point almost a year later, November 24th, 1998. We were almost a year from the day of Mr. Williams' murder. Brian and I, along with several other agents and detectives, testified in the grand jury, Franklin County grand jury, about the Renold Williams murder. The grand jury returned a 3-count indictment charging him with aggravated murder and aggravated robbery. And because of the aggravated circumstances, he faced a possibility of death if convicted of the aggravated murder charge. So even though our investigation was continuing, we now had an indictment on him, and we were pretty much prepared to go to trial. Once we reached that position where we could start to talk about going to trial, we were concerned that somebody may try to hurt the girlfriend and keep her from testifying. So we wanted to move her to a location, kind of a secret location where she and her children could stay and would hopefully be able to stay there during the duration leading up to the trial and after the trial. So we founded, with the help of the U.S. Attorney's Office Victim Witness Assistance Program, we were able to come up with an apartment that the girlfriend and her 2 children could stay in leading up to the trial. And hopefully that would help keep her safe. And Brian and I would go to the apartment every morning just to check on the girlfriend and her children to make sure that they were okay. And almost every morning, the same thing had happened. We'd go up, knock on the door of the apartment, and the drapes of the window would pop up, and there'd be a little face sticking out of the window, and it was one of her children. And we could hear him yelling, "Mom, it's the police!" Her children. Then she'd come to the door and let us in, and we'd talk to her about how she was doing, how the kids were. The kids would hang on us and stuff, and I mean, they're just adorable children. And the girlfriend continued to be strong and continued to indicate that she was willing to testify. And but every day we went and checked on her and make sure she was okay, and that she was still, comfortable enough that she was going to be able to testify for us. Another thing that happened that I want to mention, and I think I indicated that, you go along an investigation and sometimes things fall into place and they really help you. But sometimes there's other things that don't go your way. This isn't exactly that situation, but the U.S. Government had calculated Mr. Williams' time that he served in the Army and found out that he was 3 days short of having the necessary 20 years of service that one needs before they can retire and receive a pension.
3 days.
No.
3.
3 days. Apparently the government had calculated his years of service as 19 years, 11 months, and 27 days. So he technically was 3 days short. Mr. Williams found out about it before his death. He went to 1 day of training in October, 1 day of training in November. So he needed one more day of training or some kind of service to the government in order for him to have his full 20 years in. And he actually had a day scheduled in December to get his last required day so that he could have a pension. And unfortunately, he was killed before he could get that day in.
Oh, no.
So technically, he was 1 day short of having a pension that the family could use to live on. And at the time, Kasich was in the Congress. He was a U.S. representative, and Mrs. Williams and other people associated with her and in her family went to Kasich's office and explained the situation to Mr. Kasich, and he went to bat for them, and he, through a lot of hard work in that, was able to get the Army to waive that requirement that he needed one more day in order for them to receive the pension and that. So, Mr. Kasich came through. He later became the governor of New York.
You've lived in so many places. You're like, what state was that in now?
He later became the governor of Ohio. But, that was one thing that he did as a congressman, as a representative that, was really a great thing for him to do. So,
Yeah.
The Williams family was able to get the pension and use that to help live off of. So we got Tanachi indicted, 3 counts, and it's time that we move into the trial phase. I know in one of the hearings, Tanachi was brought into the courtroom wearing his jail garb, and it was for his arraignment. And he looked around the courtroom. He saw Brian and I sitting there and kind of nodded at us. He saw Julie there, and then some of Mr. Williams' family. And before he sat down, so he knew we were there and we were going to continue to be there for all the hearings and that. And anyway, the magistrate went through the hearing. Mr. Ward, Tanachi Ward, entered a plea of not guilty to the 3-count indictment, and a date for the trial was set. Before the trial happened, we thought we received some other good news, and that is that where a prison official that was assigned to the location where Tanachi was being housed prior to the trial, was engaged in conversation with Tanachi and just basically asked him, did you kill that armored car guard? And Tanachi said yes. And we received notice that Tanachi had admitted his involvement in killing Mr. Williams, and we were planning on using that, obviously, to have the prison official come in and testify that Tanachi told him that, in fact, he had killed Mr. Williams. And but unfortunately, prior to the trial, the judge in the case decided that because the prison official was technically law enforcement, that Mr. Ward, Tanachi Ward, was not read his rights, his Miranda warning.
Oh.
So we weren't able to use that statement that Tanachi made to the corrections officer that he had, in fact, killed Mr. Williams. So we're, again, you see, you win some, you lose some, but, we feel what we have is good. Trial started on January 18th of 2000. We had the first day of trial. I remember the jury was taken out to National City Bank to see where the homicide of Mr. Williams took place. They were brought back into the courthouse, and opening statements were given, and we started the trial. And Brian and I and others did our testimony, talked to the jury about our investigation, the things that we had uncovered, the different steps that we had taken. And, the prosecutors continued to bring up witnesses who had identified Tanachi Ward when they were shown photo arrays of that included his picture. We had other witnesses that came in and were able to say, when they observed Tanachi in the courtroom, they were able to say that that's definitely the guy that I saw shoot Mr. Williams. So we had people that picked his photo out of the photo array. We had people that identified him in person. We had the girlfriend's testimony. We had the 9mm shell casing match to the gun used to kill Mr. Williams. And we had the paint, even though we couldn't say that it was 100% from Tanachi's vehicle, that it came from a very similar type car. And all those things together, we presented at trial. Once the testimony was over, the jury went into deliberations. It took a full day and then half of the second day, and the jury came back, and all three counts that Tanachi was charged with, he was found guilty of. And Brian and I had sat next to Julie during this process, and obviously there's a lot of tension when the jury goes out and then it comes back. You're waiting to hear the jury's verdict, and so we're holding Julie's hands, and while the foreman goes through and on each count says guilty, and she just broke down and started crying because this is what she had been hoping for, to to help her deal with the situation, was that we had found the right person that had killed her husband, and now he was being held accountable. And so it was very emotional in the courtroom that day. But the next thing was the sentencing phase. And this part of the trial is always interesting too, because there were three possible outcomes that the jury could select. The defendant could be put to death. The defendant could be sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole, or the defendant could be sentenced to life in prison with the chance of parole. And I've had a number of cases before that were death penalty eligible, and I've only had two cases where the jury voted to give somebody the death penalty. The other three or four cases that I had that were death penalty eligible, the jury took the lesser charge or the lesser penalty and gave the defendant life in prison with no chance of parole. And if you think about it, it's hard to be on a jury and decide that you want to end somebody's life.
Absolutely.
There's always, for religious reasons or other reasons, we occasionally hear that, the wrong person was convicted. So they have that in the back of their mind, that what happens if information comes out and it, really wasn't that person, even though we felt that we proved our case beyond a reasonable doubt. That still weighs on the jury's mind, and it's easier to give somebody, the life in prison with no chance of parole verdict, because they know that person's still going to be alive. And, if anything would come up in the future to indicate that maybe that was, that he wasn't the person or whatever, he's still alive, and processing can go forward at that point. So,
and all it takes is one juror, right?
Right.
You have to have a unanimous vote for the death penalty, correct?
Absolutely. You have to be unanimous. And in this case, it did go to the jury. They had those three decisions, death, life in prison with no chance of parole, and life in prison with a chance of parole. And they decided on life in prison with no chance of parole. So it was still a very severe penalty, but it wasn't, the death penalty. And we were able to pull the jury afterwards, and we found out that there were 10 jurors in favor of the death penalty and only 2 that favored life in prison with no chance of parole. So, as Jessica said, it only takes one person. We can't worry about it when we're investigators. Our job is to collect the evidence, turn it over to the prosecutor's office. They do the best they can to present the case, and it's up to the jury, to make that decision on what happens then, whether the person's guilty or innocent, and what kind of sentence they should have. So, there was nothing we could do about it. We were satisfied, that he got life in prison with no chances of parole. That meant that he would never get out again. And, again, I think Julie was happy with it. It was really about making sure that he didn't get out of prison and have an opportunity to do this to anybody else. And I would like to, just, indicate that when a crime is committed, especially one of this magnitude, where a homicide is committed, we want to hold all parties responsible. Tanachi Ward never indicated to us who his getaway driver was. And we think we know who that person is, but we just don't have enough evidence to prove that it was him. But if anybody out there listening to this podcast happens to have information about the driver of the getaway car and the Renold Williams homicide case at National City Bank in Bexley back in 1997, to please come forward and let the Bexley Police Department or the FBI know about it. Tanachi Ward is currently serving his time. There he'll stay for the rest of his days, hopefully.
Well, on TV, it all looks like it happened so fast. But if you've been listening and keeping track, the murder of Renold Williams happened in November of 1997, but it's the winter of 2000 and 2001 before his killer is brought to justice and sentenced. So the wheels of the justice, the criminal justice system, do turn slowly but deliberately, so they get the solution right. Jessie, you got some takeaways from this episode?
I have a lot of takeaways.
I bet.
I know, but I'll stick with my three. The first is I learned a lot about cold cases and how they're worked. I know it was just a small part of this, but this idea that relationships change and that what was once a lead in the past doesn't mean it's completely dead as a case goes on past time. The second, I learned a lot about ballistics. I had no idea that guns almost have their own fingerprint. To me, that it makes sense. It makes catching criminals much more certain. But that was really surprising to me. And the third is the death penalty and how often when given the choice, jurors tend to go towards life in prison without parole. And I have a follow-up question for you, Harry. And this is just me still learning all about how the system works, but life in prison without the chance of parole, that means that they can't be released for any reason, correct?
Yeah, it's my understanding, again, if you're given life in prison with no chance of parole, there should not be any circumstances that would come up that would cause you to be able to get out of prison. The third option, if you recall, was life in prison with a chance of parole. And that means after a certain amount of time, 30 to 40 years or whatever it is, you will come up for parole and appear before the parole board. And if you can present information that indicates that you've changed your ways, that you're now able to assimilate but out in the community, you're not going to be a repeat offender. If you can present this information to the parole board, they could take a look at it and say, you know what, 30 or 40 years is long enough. Let's go ahead and grant this person parole. But in this case, my understanding again is that life in prison with no chance of parole means you don't go before the parole board. You are in there for life. And unless I'm unaware of something, that could come up, I'm pretty sure he's in there for the rest of his life. And, to be honest with you, rightfully so. Somebody that, when you consider all the things that have went into this case, who the victim was, the family, the fact that he served his country, Mr. Williams served his country. And, it's just, this is the kind of case that, somebody just deserves a severe penalty. And another thing that makes me believe that is Tanachi Ward had many opportunities to say, hey, you know what? I did this. I screwed up. I am so sorry. I should not have done what I did. He had so many opportunities all along the way to admit his involvement and accept responsibility for what he did and apologize for his actions, but he never did. So what that tells me is he's not sorry for the crime that he committed. Probably the only thing that he's sorry about is that he has to spend the rest of his life in prison. So I don't feel sorry for him. I mean, I never want to see somebody throw away their life, but there are times where you've got people that just can't get with the program, and you put them out in society, and they're going to be a repeat offender, and you got to put them away and keep them from having that opportunity again. So I don't feel bad for him. He brought it on himself.
Well, the cold-blooded murder of Renold Williams is just one of the dozens of heinous crimes that retired FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas investigated during his decades with the Bureau. And they are the topic of our podcast, Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective. If you're new to us, we're really glad you found us. If you've been with us all along, we got another episode coming up real quick. Jessica Hemmelgarn, where can folks find it and tell their friends about us?
We are on YouTube, all your favorite podcast platforms, as well as social media and our website.
All right. I'm Clark Donley for Jessica Hemmelgarn and for retired FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas. I thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective is created and hosted by Clark Donley, Harry Trombitas, and Jessie Hemmelgarn. Produced by Jessie Hemmelgarn. Stories in this podcast are inspired by Harry Trombitas' autobiography, Dark Places, about his time in the FBI. Music is called Cruise in the Back and is available on Storyblocks. You can find this podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and on our website.